And it's 6 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I'm the Professional Practice and Policy Teaching Fellow with the South Carolina Education Association. And I want to welcome everybody to this live stream tonight, where we are going to be talking about how we can support our students with disabilities. With me tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Lisa Lucas. She is a member of the SCEA and the Beaufort County Education Association. She's been a member since 2001. She spent the past 20 years teaching students with severe and profound disabilities. She's currently at H.E. McCracken Middle School. She's served as her local president of the Beaufort County Education Association, and this year she's serving as an executive board member from the Low Country region. I want to go ahead and welcome you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
All right. Thank you, Todd, for inviting me. And I want to give a shout out to the SCEA as well, too. I have had the opportunity for leadership and conferences and the opportunity to meet many people and colleagues throughout the state, again, through this association. So I just much appreciate their involvement and inviting me to be a special guest today.
Great. And we're so happy and honored to have you on the live stream tonight. So tonight's, this is a lot, to cover in 30 minutes. How do we support our students? And you and I were talking beforehand about the fact that our teachers' teaching conditions translates to our student learning conditions. And we know that teachers across the board are really under a lot of stress right now. A lot of that has to do with the pandemic, and but I think really that strain started before the pandemic. And I think in particularly with our special education teachers, I think a lot of folks don't really know what it's like to teach special ed. I was only in it for 2 years. My father was in a special education teacher for most of his 50 plus years in public education. And I think folks that don't teach special ed don't really understand the unique challenges and the unique stresses of that. Could you help people who maybe aren't familiar with special education understand the challenges and how much work is involved and how much stress is involved with teaching special ed?
Thank you. I'm going to give you the first introduction within special education. Just like our general education, our special education students are general education students first. And if you were to go to a general education class, you could have students that take AP classes, honors classes. Then you have some students that are in your average class, and some schools may offer the remedial class. So within our general ed spectrum, we have students on different peers trying to reach their goals and their achievements, and to give them that opportunity to challenge them. And within special education itself, there are different branches and different style programs as well. One of the biggest special education classrooms that you would see in majority of the schools would be a resource classroom. And that would be our students that are in the general education classes, English, math, science, social studies, that may need a little extra help with their reading, with their math skills, a little bit of writing, sensory processing. So we would involve some of our therapists, our occupational or physical therapists. Some students also receive speech and language. One of the biggest special education processing. So we would involve some of our therapists.
Sorry, we had a little.
No, it's okay.
There. Go ahead.
Those are students that you see every day in the classrooms, in the hallways, that you wouldn't notice anything necessarily different about them, other than they might need a little extra support. And often those teachers go into the general education setting and help support the math teacher, the reading teacher, whatever other core ELA. Then you have another little branch sort of in between a support classroom and an intensive support classroom. And that might be a group of students that have a learning disability that need a little more time in service. And that's something that we look at individually when we look at our students with special ed needs. First of all, they go through a different assessment in order to qualify for special education. It's not something that is just handed and granted to someone. And then you look at their areas where they need the help and where the deficit is. And also every student may have different service minutes that they need to help them achieve their goals for reading or for math. So you may have this resource teacher, as I just spoke about, who has students that come to her room that she works with them in reading and math and sensory sensory processing, and also pushes into the general ed class. Now that teacher can have up to 33 students on their caseload. Okay, but oftentimes our higher ups just see that number and say, you have 33 students, you can get it done. But they don't look at all the minutes and all the services that those students need. And when you look at your day, you only have 2,100 minutes in a week to get all those services in and to balance all the schedules of everyone and on different grade levels. That becomes a magic for sure, in order to get all those in and to give those students exactly what they need. And then I was leading into, we have students that may have a little more of a learning disability that need a little more intensive support. So they also would be in similar to a resource classroom, but it'd have a little more support in the class. They would spend a little more time in there and may push out more for a science or social studies class and the related arts classes. And most of those students in those groups would take the regular assessments, which would be our regular test assessments on the regular level, but they may have different accommodations. And sometimes some of our accommodations for our students with special needs are one-on-one, oral test administration, extended time, small group setting is definitely one majority of our students need at the beginnings in order to be successful with those testing settings. So then the next group, we have more our intensive support special needs students. And this is a group of students that oftentimes when you see us walking down the hallway, you know we're a little bit different. Our behaviors, our movement, our gait, our speech are definitely a little more effective than your general education peer. A lot of our students in the intensive support classroom or the students with the severe and profound disabilities receive physical therapy and occupational therapy, speech and language, vision. A lot of our students also have a behavior intervention plan. And again, all those working together help our students be the best that they can be and to be as independent as they can possibly be. And the students that are in the more intensive support classrooms receive their functional curriculum in those classrooms. So then those teachers are responsible for teaching the ELA and math and reading on their level. So for some of the classes, it may become more of a pre-readiness skill where you're matching letters, you're matching colors. And that may be something you're thinking, well, they're at a middle school level. Well, that could be where we're at. At the beginning, we were only able to recognize one letter. Now we're able to recognize all the letters in our name, all the letters in the alphabet. The groups of students in those classes tend to be the ones that take the alternative assessments. And that is an assessment that is designed for the students with the more cognitive delays. And it's the 1% of the population that takes those assessments. And those are all individually given. And sometimes too, when I talked earlier about the higher ups, we have a resource class that may have 33 students or a speech and language therapist. They may have a large caseload and people think, well, you can do that. But when you look at the minutes of service that each of those students need, how you can make all of that happen is often the question every teacher is facing this year. But I think special education teachers, we face that a little bit differently.
Right. And this isn't even mentioning all of the paperwork. I think a lot of folks aren't even familiar with the fact that you have to have an IEP meeting and then you have to send out multiple invitations. You have to bring people together. You have to write the IEP. You have to perhaps make modifications or addendums to the IEP. There's a whole cascade of paperwork that goes with each of those potentially 33 students that you have. That is a mountain of work in and of itself.
And I mean, and sometimes I think special education teachers, that could be just sometimes just a little bit of the piece of the cake. One of the issues, I served as our committee chair for the ad hoc committee, for the special education ad hoc committee. And not only did I hear these concerns from my colleagues down here in the low country, but throughout the state too. And the one was definitely the caseload numbers of students that we have. We have awesome therapists, our occupational therapists, physical therapists, vision itinerants, our school psychologists, as I mentioned before. And they so want to help us out, teachers, and give us different ideas and different strategies and how to work with our students with the processing disorder or a behavior intervention plans and how to be creative. But everyone is pulled so thin. And as we had just mentioned about IEP meetings, and they're just as filled up with IEP meetings. Our therapists serve multiple schools. And not only are you serving students in multiple schools, you're attending IEP meetings on top of servicing the students as well too. School psychologists, you're often retesting, doing our 3-year reevaluation. They would love to have that time to be creative thinking and have that organic conversations with us and to give us some more ideas. So we do a lot of things on the fly when we're seeing each other in the hallway. And something else, not only as a special education teacher, but I believe regular education teachers experience this too. When I first started teaching 24 years ago, when we had faculty meetings or department meetings, they were very organic.
Yeah.
You talked about what you learned or what strategy worked really good in your classroom. You had a few things that you had accomplished on the agenda, but everything wasn't so data driven that we need to accomplish X, Y, Z, and PDQ, where you didn't have that chance again to have those organic conversations. And so much of what we learn in special education in order to be an effective teacher is hands-on training. It's hands-on learning, it's hands-on experience. Many things that I've learned that have worked with my students were not anything that I read in the textbook.
Right. What would you say? So we know that there's this huge issue. We saw the Sarah supply and demand report where we have like around 1,000 vacancies, and every year that report comes out, it's always special education is one of the areas where our public school districts find it incredibly challenging to fill those particular vacancies, partially just because I think there aren't a lot of people going into it. And obviously, I think there's a lot of people leaving it because there's so much stress, added stress beyond just the normal stresses of teaching. What would be your advice to policymakers in terms of how could they improve the situation to make special education a more palatable profession for young people to consider, and for those who are in it to feel like they can stay and that it can be sustainable without, completely getting stressed out and burned out?
One thing I have learned over the 20 years teaching special education, I could not do my job without my paraeducators and my AEA, which is our one-on-one assistance as well. And when you get an incredible team that can work with you, can work with the students, you keep that team together. Administration and policymakers listen to the teachers. Let them be in that process of interviewing for the paraeducators or the help. They also have a little more of an idea of what if that student needs a one-on-one, who might mesh very well with that student. Having great support staff is the only way you can do it. You also, as a special education teacher, people say, "Oh, bless your heart, you're a special person." No, it's definitely a passion. There is definitely something driven underneath me to do this and to want to do this. There is no doubt in that. When teachers ask for help and they say they need another assistant, the higher ups and the policymakers need to listen. We don't ask willy-nilly for assistance for extra help along the way. We ask when we need it. And I think those are things that we need to listen to as well. Also collaborate and listen to the teachers. This is something I spoke to our superintendent about too. We may not want to be a special education coordinator. We may not want to be in administration, but we have a lot of experience. And just like you said, with those teachers with that 20+ years experience, this is something I've witnessed this year within my building, and I know what's going on in other buildings. Teachers that are well-seasoned, tough teachers that love what they're doing. They're not, easily bendable, shapeable, and going to melt over, spilled milk. Have had meltdowns this year.
Yeah.
We've never had those before. Those are those days and times where you think, well, what am I doing?
How,
And in special education, oftentimes too, we need to look when we have our assistants and our paraeducators that we are there for the children. And sometimes some of our children have different needs compared to ones that we've had before in the classroom. Sometimes you might have to help a student feed a student, or you may have to help toilet a student. That may be something you've never done before, but that may be what that student needs that's in your classroom. One thing I had expressed too, I had the opportunity to speak at our legislative breakfast at the district office. I said, the group of students that I work with have very intense behavior issues, and I have a split classroom, and my other group are medically fragile that have seizure disorders and are tube fed. I said, for your average person who would be in a few other schools, they would have no idea students like mine even go to school or go to school in Beaufort County. And until you see that population, you don't realize it exists and that there are teachers and staff members that are working with those students.
yeah. One of the things my father did, who was like I mentioned, a special ed teacher for so long, was he felt that a real strong need to connect his students, and he taught TMD, PMD students with TMD, PMD, and he felt a strong need to connect them to the rest of the school. Because
Absolutely.
I think, in the dark days of this, a lot of times these classes were relegated to some other part of the building, and there was a sense that they were separate from the rest of the school. And he felt it was critical that they feel like they're part of the school, and that other students were connected to them. So he always had these programs where the students were connected, very connected to the rest of the school. Can you talk about how important that is, and also some advice you might give to, I'll call them regular teachers who are not teaching special ed, how they can help build those connections as well in their buildings?
A good question. And I always think that it's so important and so key. And one of the big things I look at too is you always want to try to do it in a non-threatening way for both groups of students. Sometimes you have to look and check out the students a little on both sides and let your guard down a little bit. We've done activities with our Junior National Honor Society. We have what we call now, used to be called Project Unify, but it's Unified Champions. We've applied for a grant at McCracken for the last 3 years. When I was at Bluffton High School, we were one of the first schools that received that grant. We were also recognized as a model Project Unify school at Bluffton High School. You just get kind of creative with some of your ways, and you also learn through sometimes our assistant principals. Some of the students who may hang out in ISS, they may be looking for an opportunity to feel good about themselves. So we often pair them up and we'll read together. Obviously with COVID, things have been a little bit different. So we do, when the weather is nice, we'll go outside and listen to stories. We'll chalk outside. And it also gives some of the general education students a purpose. When we have students that are struggling with reading, or our ESOL students, we're the perfect audience. We're not going to know if you're going to mispronounce a word. We're there that you're just excited to read it for us. Or when we pop in the dance class and you just get to let us dance by the mirror and have a good time and spin us around in our wheelchairs. Those are awesome opportunities. Our band teacher, they perform for us outside our classroom door, but then everybody popped in to speak to the students. They weren't wearing a mask, but just being appropriate. The students that are higher level than mine, they've been doing activities once a month already. So it's just being creative thinking. We've participated in, we had a youth summit last year. The weather was perfect. We held it outside. We did some different competitions. We had stories to read. We read the dot, and the kids all created their own dot, and all of the students participated in that. And those are opportunities that create memories, that build relationships. And then when the students move on to the next school, they have those friends there that they look forward to. The cheerleaders, the football team, they love those opportunities to come and do a practice cheer for us. We would go to the pep rallies as well too, but as we said too, with COVID, it's kind of put a little bit of a hinge on it too, and especially we'll speak on my group of students that are more medically fragile, that you just want to take that extra precaution. We've done some fun things with Zoom, where we participate and watched another class live from Zoom. A little bit of creative thinking there. Our media center specialist has done an incredible job recording books for us, and then we're listening to Miss Sunday in our classroom.
That's great. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit, Lisa. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
I want to make sure we cover this. We're finding out recently that there's going to be a new push to go for vouchers again, these private school vouchers, which is unfortunate that we have to keep sort of facing this monster year after year of folks who want to siphon money away from our public schools and give them to private schools. And one of the major concerns I have has to do with our special ed population, because these students don't, if a private school doesn't have to accept these students and provide them services. And so as you see this money go away from public schools into private schools, one of the populations that I think is going to be hurt the most is our special ed population. As that money goes away, you still only can afford maybe one school psychologist, but that person's going to be spread more thin, and all these resources that are dwindling are going to be spread thin. And I'm very concerned about the impact that vouchers could have on our special ed population. Could you talk about, are my concerns valid?
Oh, absolutely valid. And one of the things I have been very aware of, but have been very active this year, is advocating to our superintendent, advocating to our legislators, advocating. I feel like that's been a part-time job this year. And that's all we have to keep doing. And oftentimes as educators, we have said, we often shoot our own selves in the foot. When there's not enough subs and we take in all the extra kids. Okay, well, guess what? They know we can do it. We're doing it. Why are they going to hire extra subs, hypothetically? Right. Okay. Same with if we're not reaching out and talking to the politicians about these issues that we're facing. Well, they're going to say, well, we didn't hear anybody say anything. And you need to make your voices heard. And I really have felt truly after this past presidential election, in general, one way or another, the power of voting. And your vote matters, your voice matters. And one of the things too we've learned as we get older is oftentimes your average person is only going to want to hear what they want to hear. So when your average person hears the way the vouchers are being presented, it sounds like, ooh, this is a great opportunity for the lower income students, the students that are rural. Man, they can go to this fancy school. Not realizing it's not going to have all the services that a public school has. I will share personal experience. I taught kindergarten in a Catholic school that I went to in Cleveland, and absolutely loved it. We had a mobile unit that we had our speech therapist, and then we had a student that worked with the few students that had a learning disability. There wasn't a whole lot of services for that group of students if they needed more. And in that retrospect, then they were asked, or you work together for them to go on to the public school. That is something that I learned too with the group of students that I have. The opportunities that we have, the different therapies, the different therapists, special education, special transportation. Those are things that public education offers. Private education does not offer that. And again, you have to read that fine print and read in between the lines. And I just sent out my my message to my legislators and those that are serving on the education committee, my thoughts and feelings about the vouchers.
Right. And we also see where vouchers are implemented, in many cases, the tuition starts to go up commensurate with
vouchers
being in place. And we also know that I think the RAND Corporation did a study that students in poverty rarely benefit from vouchers. So it's a and again, my concern is the most vulnerable students are going to be hurt the most by this, but they're couching it. There's almost this deep cynicism that these proponents have, where they're actually couching it as though it's going to be a good thing for those students, when we know through the data that it's not. And we know just through common sense that when you siphon money away from public schools and give them to private schools that don't have to provide special ed resources, that can discriminate based upon the person's religion or sexual orientation
or behaviors, things
or
like that.
they can discriminate. Why should public tax dollars go to those schools, and they're not going to be held accountable?
Yes,
at all?
I think that's the key word, the lack of accountability. That's, I think, the scary part looking forward.
And I think the thing is, it's not. I think the other side of this is, it's not that public educators are against innovation or trying new models. We actually would love the permission to do that.
Yes.
Let us do that in a public setting. Don't take our money away and give it to an entity that's not accountable, that's just doing something. And that may be a good option for some. If you want a Christian education for your child and you want to send them to a Christian school, if you want to spend your money on that and do that, go for it. But that
absolutely,
tax dollars shouldn't be going to that, especially when if I have a special education student, if I have a student who needs those types of services, and they're not even allowed to go to that school because they don't provide those services, or I can try to send them there, but the services they get are not going to be nearly as good as what the public school is providing them. And so that's one of the major concerns. I'm glad that I'm not glad that you're agreeing, but I'm glad I'm not thinking incorrectly about that. And so that's something that I think parents of students with disabilities need to be out fighting for this. And if you care at all about students who have disabilities, and that's what this live stream is all about, if we're going to support them, you can't support vouchers, in my opinion. Those two, supporting those students with disabilities and supporting vouchers, are not aligned. Those two goals. So
no, and in many of the schools too, even when you walk in, they're not equipped. And when you look at the faculty and staff members, it's a whole new drawing board.
What would it be, you, just to kind of wrap this up?
Okay.
What are some ways? What are some creative ways that the education community can support our special education teachers? Because we know if we support those teachers and give them better working conditions, that will translate into better learning conditions for our special education students. So what are some specific ways that we as a community can support them?
I definitely think we need to look at paying our para educators definitely a living wage. Where they're at now, it's embarrassing. They can make more money stocking shelves. Something else that comes along with many of our students in special education is students with some severe behaviors. When you get hit, pinched, bit, grabbed, you come in day after day after that wears thin on you. I think if we had some educators that would be willing to sometimes pop in for a half hour to give that teacher or an assistant an opportunity for a little more of a break, being appropriate and finding the least restrictive environment for our students to maybe go out for related arts classes is not always appropriate to go into the PE class with 50 kids when you have a student who has a sensory processing disorder. But you also want them to go out a little bit here and there. So sometimes for 5-10 minutes at a time is appropriate. Have our doors open and welcomed, when they do some different creative ideas and they're doing some creative lessons, to invite our students to that, to have that open door policy. I think too, if they have questions, stop and ask us. Come to our room and ask us questions. One thing I remember when I taught resource, I was always the one going around checking in with the regular ed teachers. Do you need anything from me? How is the student doing? What's that? I was the one who felt like I was on rollerblades. Rarely did the general education teacher come to my room to ask me what they could do to help that student or what I was doing with that student. It's got to be a little more teamwork for sure. And we got to look at too, especially when you're in a resource setting, if a student has some behavior issues, that you don't look and be like, well, that's the resource teacher. That's her problem. That's her student. That it's everybody. We're all here together.
I think that's
It's the whole care package. One of the big things I have always said, day one, when I sit in an IEP meeting, we are all a team.
yes.
You know, it's the therapists that are part of this team, the parents, you know, we're working together. We're all being creative. You know, we might all have to think of some different things, but we are here together to service this child. You know, we might need the nurse. It might be, like you said, a best friend that they have in general ed that just, for whatever reason, they click with. Or, you know, you develop the relationships with the SRO officer or our behavior management specialist, you know, to have those key people that are important in their lives. We've said this many times before about general education students and teachers, that you may be that only solid person in that person's life. And that's true in both fields.
Yeah.
But in special education, it is so key with routine and people and trust, that is so key. And so key for those students too, because they develop very quiet, special bonds, even if they're not able to verbalize that.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time tonight. We've reached the end of our time together. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your input, and thank you so much for your leadership in the SCEA and the Beaufort County Education Association, and as a member of our board. We're so thankful for the time that you put in to those leadership responsibilities, and for advocating for our profession as well. And thank you so much for what you do, because what you do is hard. But it's incredibly important. And I want to just say, reach out to anybody who's watching. If you're a special education teacher, we would love to have you as part of our association. You can go to jointhescea.org, and you can help Lisa and myself and our state move forward and build the kind of schools that our teachers and our students deserve. And we want to encourage everybody to reach out to your legislators right now. To stop this voucher bill, because this is something that will absolutely hurt our public schools and our most vulnerable population. So again, Lisa, thank you so much for your time tonight. Any final words before we sign off?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And, you know, as I said a couple times through our discussion, you have to advocate. And when you have students that are nonverbal, you are their voice.
Yes.
And you learn that to advocate for them, advocate for their needs, advocate for their families, and advocate for a brighter future.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really tickled that I had this opportunity.
You're welcome, Lisa. And we can advocate better together. So I hope folks
Amen. Thank you.
Join the SCEA.org so much. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for tuning in tonight, and leave your comments, and we'll and Lisa and I can check those, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that folks have out there. And we wish you a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.